Welcome to 28storms.com on this Tuesday, September 6th. This is your latest tropical weather update. The latest Hurricane Center outlook has outlined 4 separate areas in the Atlantic Basin, one being Hurricane Katia over here to the southwest of Bermuda, and we have Invest 95L in the central Atlantic, which is now being given a 90% chance of development. In fact, it could become the next depression as early as this afternoon. They also just outlined a new feature here. This is a tropical disturbance located just to the east of the Lesser Antilles. However, upper level conditions do not appear overly favorable. They're only giving this a 10% chance of development. And I think this is going to be our new Invest. It would be Invest 96L if it does become one. And this is the tropical disturbance located in the southwest Gulf of Mexico and Bay of Campeche. That is being given a 30% chance of development over the next 48 hours. First off, the latest on Hurricane Katia. As of the 2 p.m. official advisory, maximum sustained winds are still 115 miles per hour, making this a Category 3. It's expected to safely pass between Bermuda and the Outer Banks of North Carolina. However, Bermuda is now under a tropical storm watch, and there is the possibility that the island could sustain some tropical storm force winds, but the inner core of the hurricane is expected to remain well off toward the west. And thankfully, we have a trough that is rather persistent over the U.S. eastern seaboard, and that's going to eventually steer our hurricane more toward the northeast and out to sea. And this is also being supported by nearly all model guidance, as you can see on the latest tropical model plot. Before checking out the latest satellite imagery, I would first like to show you the latest radar animation over the eastern United States, where we can still see the remnants of Tropical Storm Lee swirling about over the Tennessee Valley, with much of the rainfall occurring out ahead of the circulation over the mid-Atlantic states and into New England. We can also make this out fairly well on the latest visible satellite animation, and on the latest infrared you can still see the presence of that trough dangling across from the southwest Gulf of Mexico all the way across the entire U.S. eastern seaboard. And thankfully this trough is persisting in the mid to upper levels, and so therefore this hurricane poses no risk of directly impacting the United States east coast. If anything, the threat of rip currents for many of the mid-Atlantic states will persist for the next several days, but fortunately the hurricane will be no direct threat as it will safely recurve. However, as noted yesterday, the same trough that is going to safely recurve Hurricane Katia could cause some mischief in the southern Gulf of Mexico or Bay of Campeche, and we are beginning to see some signs of that this afternoon with some increasing cloudiness and convection, especially in this overall area. I did take a quick look at the latest ASCAT satellite imagery, and there were no signs of any closed surface circulation beginning to develop just yet. We have more so just an elongated surface trough from southwest to northeast. But nevertheless, this will be an area to keep a very close watch on. We don't expect any development to occur very quickly over the next couple of days, but several of the model members are trying to develop a weak tropical cyclone from this feature between the next 5 to 7 days. Turning to the central Atlantic, this is the new feature being highlighted in the 2 p.m. Hurricane Center outlook. However, if we go ahead and turn on the latest water vapor imagery, you will notice that there is quite a lot of northerly wind shear coming in. Not only do we have this upper level low located to the north that's driving a lot of this northerly shear, but we also have the hurricane, and of course when you have a major hurricane, usually the outflow is very powerful, and that's really not going to aid in the development of this little feature here to the southeast of Puerto Rico. So we're not expecting any development from that feature. However, if we go back really quickly to the visible, we see that 95L Invest is quickly becoming better organized. It's more than likely going to become the next depression as early as this afternoon. The most recent ASCAT satellite image of 95L Invest was taken earlier this morning. There were no signs of a closed surface circulation just yet, but you can make out that this is a very high amplitude wave axis, and we just needed a little bit more evidence of some westerly winds to really confirm that this is a depression. But the latest microwave satellite imagery taken late this morning, combined with the latest visible and infrared imagery, would seem to indicate that our tropical wave has become even better defined compared to what it was when that ASCAT pass was taken. So we are more than likely on the verge of our next tropical cyclone of the 2011 season. Now, there is some question as to whether or not 95L will pass over the Leeward Islands or go just to the north, and the models are fairly divergent beyond day 3. We have some of the models taking this into the southwest Atlantic, whereas some of the more southerly models are taking this into the far northeast Caribbean. The latest 12Z GFS forecast steadily takes 95L in a general west-northwest direction, and it does begin to intensify the system a little bit more as we go into the 4 to 7 day range. Thankfully, this model seems to indicate that it will pass to the north of the Caribbean, and we still have some persistent troughing over the U.S. East Coast, which would tend to pull this system more northward and potentially away from the United States. However, that is a very extended forecast. And also, you will notice as we start the loop over again, it also shows the trough persisting over much of the southern Gulf of Mexico, where the model is still entertaining the possibility of some tropical cyclone development before that system passes off toward the west into Mexico. However, there is also some differing scenarios, with the European taking this a little bit more toward the northeast into the trough versus being stuck over here in the southern Gulf of Mexico and then eventually moving more toward the west underneath this ridge over Texas. Now, despite the disagreement between the GFS and European, the CMC does seem to support the GFS with a bit more of a westerly track of that Gulf of Mexico system. It doesn't really show much in the way of development until around day 4 or day 5, but you notice that between day 5 and day 6, it looks like the system is inching a little bit more toward the west. It looks like this trough may slowly retreat more toward the east, allowing for some ridging to redevelop over the northwest Gulf of Mexico, which would place Mexico at a higher risk. And also, we have the developing 95L invest passing to the north of the Caribbean, as I'll go ahead and show this again. Now, perhaps the most interesting highlight of this afternoon is the latest 12Z run from the European model. Not only does it have an alternative scenario for the potential Gulf storm, but it also shows 95L moving more toward the west. So we're going to start off at the 0 hour. Again, this is the 500 millibar pattern overlaid on the sea level pressure forecast. It's already beginning to pick up on the broad area of low pressure over the southern Gulf, and as we go into day 1, 2, and 3, notice that the European is a lot more aggressive with developing the system down in the Gulf compared to the GFS and the CMC. So therefore, that could be one of the reasons why as we go into day 4, it's showing the weakness over the southeast United States beginning to pull our storm more toward the north compared to going into Mexico. And by day 5, this is quite interesting. It actually has a landfalling tropical cyclone somewhere between southeast Louisiana and Destin, Florida. So this is right around the region where Tropical Storm Lee caused a lot of heavy rainfall and isolated flooding. So obviously we do not want this scenario to occur, but it is something that we will have to watch out for. And also, compared to some of the other models, it's keeping 95L invest rather weak, so therefore it stays steered by the low-level steering flow, which is dominated by easterly winds, and as a result it takes it just to the south of San Juan, Puerto Rico with a 1011 millibar low center. However, based on the more recent organization of 95L, it looks as though the European is a little bit too conservative with the system's future intensity, which would lead me to believe in the more northerly model tracks. So interests in the Northeast Caribbean are still advised to keep a very close watch on this system. It's still really hard to figure out whether or not it's going to directly pass over the islands, but I do think that the European is a little bit too far toward the south, and I would expect the storm to be somewhere in this general vicinity within the next 3 to 5 days. So thankfully, our major hurricane is no direct threat to any land masses, but it looks as though we could see tropical cyclones Maria and Nate fairly soon. So stick to 28storms.com throughout the remainder of the week into next weekend for more comprehensive updates. And of course, don't forget to check out the Hurricane Tracker app if you're on the go.